Ladies and gentlemen, friends, great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Benedetto, for those wonderful introductory comments. Thank you also to Suk, an organization that is in its infancy but which promises a great deal, and no doubt is going to be a beacon of learning influence, especially in relation to public policy. Thank you also to Caritas for organizing this event and for being the driving force behind identifying urban suffering as a major theme that all of us should connect with. It is a great pleasure for me to be here in Milan, wonderful city. It's always exciting for me to come to Italy because in many ways, Italy, Trieste in particular, is the spiritual home for many of us psychiatrists engaged in community mental health work. And it's always a pleasure to come here and meet up with old friends and also to renew the DNA of modern community mental health practice. Work of Franco Basaglia continues to have a profound influence on those of us who are not only working within community mental health, but who are out trying to push the boundaries of community mental health to engage and involve with some profoundly challenging social issues in our countries. I'm going to talk about some work that we have been doing recently in England around mental health rights, which is fundamentally an approach to address the systematic failure of government policy and professional psychiatric practice in impacting on inequalities, particularly ethnic or racial inequalities in the experience of mental health services. I'll go on to develop that theme in the context of my presentation as to why I believe that government policies and professional practice have abandoned marginalized groups, particularly in the urban settings. I will focus my presentation largely on my experience of working with people of non-European origin living in the United Kingdom, particularly in big cities like Birmingham, and also more recently in Scotland, in Glasgow. There is an increasing tenor of xenophobia and racism that has entered our civic society, particularly the political classes in Western Europe, that makes it even more pressing for those of us of non-European origin to come together and make alliances with radical practitioners in addressing the inequalities and marginalization people from black and minority communities continue to experience. It's a profoundly important issue because the discourse and the dialogue about immigrants and migration experience to some extent have been overshadowed by the experience of people who are essentially European in their origin. In talking about young people, people like my children who have been brought up in the European context and who have a legitimate claim to citizenship, but who continue to experience profound inequalities in every aspect of their life. It is estimated that something like 4% of people in Western Europe are of non-European origin, and this proportion is only going to increase. We're talking about 25 to 30 million people of non-European origin living in Western Europe. And over 20 cities in Europe have a population of 100,000 to 500,000 people of non-European origin. That's a large number of urban settings in Europe where there is a significant and substantial minority ethnic or non-European presence. Paris and London have more than 1 million people of non-European origin living there. And if you look at the proportion of young people of non-European origin in these big cities, these grand cities, we can see a profile emerging of increasing number of people of non-European background living, growing up, and experiencing their life almost entirely in such urban settings. There are 4 cities, Amsterdam, Brussels, Frankfurt, and London, where more than 25% of the population is of non-European origin. However, if you look at the actual experience of young people growing up in these cities of non-European background, it portrays a very depressing story. There are, of course, pockets of advantage and affluence, which we are aware of in relation to the post-migratory experience of people of non-European origin. However, the common theme is one of marginality, exclusion, disadvantage, and persistent discrimination that is faced by youth, young people of non-European origin. In cities like Birmingham in England, London in England, Glasgow in Scotland, cities that I'm more familiar with, these experiences of marginality, exclusion, and discrimination are manifested in the context of what are generally described as social problems, and more specifically as mental health problems. It is not surprising for me to see in the earlier slide that was put up about mental well-being of youth, that more democratic and affluent countries, the well-being of youth is reported as positive. But it's not surprising that the United Kingdom comes towards the lower end of the league table, largely to do with the experience that is shared by a large number of people of non-European origin, young people, in the educational system, in the healthcare system, and in their failure to actually fully participate within the social life in those cities. What has it got to do with mental health and the work that we do? In relation to mental health, as has been said already, it's often a manifestation, a symptom of a grander and more pervasive malaise. What we see as psychiatrists and mental health workers are symptoms of a more general problem. But these symptoms or these manifestations actually help us read into that general problem in a systematic way. And as has been said already, it is impossible to try and deal with these problems if we continue to confine ourselves to specific professional models of intervention in addressing those. As the professor said, the mad v. bad approach, or even a much more expanded psycho-social approach in addressing those things. One will have to fundamentally connect with social problems where they exist and as they exist. And as psychiatrists and mental health professionals, incumbent upon us to locate ourselves outside of the professional discourse to some extent. Because the professional discourse in this area is so limiting and so containing, that we will have to connect with other disciplines and other agencies and other actions in order to address the problems that we face, in order to help individuals, especially young people, as they experience these difficulties in terms of their living, in terms of their social context, and in terms of their particular personal narratives. In the work that we do, we are aware of the 3 issues that are beginning to impinge on the minority groups, where people are beginning to take note of these failures that the government policies and professional practice have resulted in. I put 3 major themes that have dominated certainly psychiatric discourse, professional discourse during my professional career in Western Europe. And those are deinstitutionalization, focus on recovery and rehabilitation, and also the requirement to involve ourselves as agents of social inclusion in addressing problems of people from a variety of backgrounds. Our focus is in relation to mental health, people with mental illnesses, mental health problems, and these three themes have dominated much of the work that most of us have done over the last 20 or 30 years. And I say that these issues are considered to be archetypally important in terms of the progress and reform within psychiatric societies in this world, psychiatric profession across the world. But I say these policies are beginning to grind to a halt, partly because of a loss of nerve amongst professional practitioners, and also the appalling and abject lack of leadership provided by professional agencies or professional groups. For example, in terms of deinstitutionalization, the clock is going to be ticking in relation to the reintroduction of increasing forms of institutionalization in most Western countries. I'm talking about our experience in the United Kingdom, whereas the mental hospitals were successfully closed down about 25 years ago. There's a reintroduction of the mental hospital as centers of forensic psychiatry. There's a proliferation of such institutional places now in the United Kingdom, which we thought had got around the problem of dealing with institutionalization of mentally ill. In terms of recovery and rehabilitation, fundamental problems to do with the government policies in withdrawing money from mental health services. And the very high peak of resource allocation to mental health, certainly in the United Kingdom, is now past. There's increasing financial consequences being faced by services, particularly by people with long-term mental health problems, which compromise their recovery and rehabilitation. Cuts in government services. The retreat from a welfare state by the government and increasing privatization of mental health facilities, and the denial of basic benefits to people who are most disadvantaged, people with long-term mental illness, and seriously compromising attempts at recovery and rehabilitation. And similarly, in terms of social inclusion, as mental health services become impoverished, as government policies in a calculated way have an impact, adverse impact on the experience of people with mental health problems. Significant cuts in our country around the benefits that are being paid to people who are declared to have disabilities, and an explicit government policy to actually cut back on those benefits, which compromise social inclusion and increasing marginalization of people with mental health problems. And to me, as someone who has largely worked in multicultural settings in Europe, it is the profound effects of these changes are most manifest in the experience of people from minority backgrounds. And it is that which has driven us actually to think in terms of how do we address these essential problems that communities, our communities, continue to face. I don't need to go over the evidence in relation to the experiences of people from minority backgrounds, the migrant and post-migrant experience in Europe, because this is highly publicized, written up, and anyone who has even the remotest interest in this area will be aware of some of the major problems that people who are migrants in Europe and their children face, continue to face. What is still a prominent issue, even after several years, several decades of migration to Western Europe by non-European people, is continuing marginality, discrimination, and social exclusion of people from our backgrounds. And this is also manifest in terms of the mental health experiences of people from black and minority backgrounds. Profound ethnic or racial inequalities in the way black people, people from migrant backgrounds experience mental health services, and profound differences in the outcome of mental health interventions between majority white communities and minority black communities.